Every night I hear someone trying to open the front door to my apartment. Today I remembered that I had forgotten to lock the front door. That mistake almost cost me my life. I'm writing this, locked in the bathroom. My fingers are trembling, pressing the phone to my knees so the light from the screen doesn't seep out from under the door. He's probably still in the apartment, or maybe he's already gone. I don't know. I don't know anything except for one thing. All these months, I wasn't going crazy. It was real, and it's much, much worse than I could have ever imagined. My name is Louise Miller, and I live alone in an old brick house in one of Chicago's less prosperous neighborhoods. My life is routine: remote work as a graphic designer, food delivery, evening TV series, and increasingly strained, rare calls with friends. I was used to being alone. Moreover, I valued it, until it started to feel vulnerable. It all started about 4 months ago. The first time I heard the sound was late at night, when I was working late. A clear metallic click, as if someone outside had carefully, effortlessly pulled down the handle of the front door and let it go. I froze. My heart was pounding in my throat. I sat motionless for 10 minutes, listening to the silence. Nothing else happened. I wrote it off as the old house, a draft, my imagination playing tricks on me. But the sound repeated the next night and the night after. It always came in the same time window, between 2:30 and 3 a.m. It wasn't a crude attempt at a break-in, not a jiggling of the lock. It was specifically a check, a quick, delicate click, followed by dead silence. I stopped sleeping at night. My life turned into a nightmarish waiting game. I changed the locks, installed a mini peephole camera that recorded motion. Nothing. The camera only captured the empty, dimly lit hallway of the landing. I called the police. 2 tired officers listened to me, inspected the door, and shrugged. "No signs of forced entry, ma'am. Old houses creak. Maybe try some sedatives." I felt completely insane, but the sound didn't stop. It became a part of my life, my personal devil that came at exactly 2:47 a.m. I started to hate that sound, but in a twisted way, I got used to it. As long as it was there, everything remained within its framework. He checked. I was afraid. It was a terrible but stable ritual. And then today happened. The evening had been awful. I missed a deadline. My boss chewed me out on Zoom. I had a fight with my best friend over something stupid. I was dead on my feet. Getting home, I hastily ate dinner, collapsed on the sofa, and fell into a sleep without even making it to the bedroom. I forgot to do the most important thing. I forgot to lock the door. My sleep was restless, full of fragments of nightmares. I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe. The room was pitch black. I was lying on the sofa, covered with a blanket, unable to move, gripped by a primal animal fear. Something was wrong, and then I heard it. Not a click, a creak, a very, very quiet creak of the floorboard in the hallway, the exact one that usually sounds when I step on it. The blood froze in my veins. I stopped breathing. My brain refused to accept the obvious. The door was unlocked, and someone had come in. I lay still, pretending to be asleep, but my eyelids were slightly open, just enough to see the strip of light from the street lamp falling from the window onto the floor. Someone was moving around the apartment. The steps were unhurried, cautious, but not sneaking. There was a certain confidence in them, as if this someone knew the layout. He moved around the living room. I heard the rustle of papers on my desk, then a light clink of ceramic. He touched my mug. He wasn't rummaging through drawers. He wasn't looking for money or electronics. He was just acquainting himself with my space. And that was the true horror. Paralyzed with fear, I could only listen. The steps came closer to the sofa. I felt goosebumps run down my spine. He was standing right behind my back. I could feel his presence on my skin, a heavy, dense sensation of a foreign gaze on the back of my head. He was watching me for a minute, 2, Time stopped. Then he slowly walked around the sofa and came into my field of view. It was the silhouette of a man of average height in a dark hooded jacket, the hood pulled over his head. He was standing half-turned away from me, looking at the photos on the shelf. His movements were calm, almost casual. He picked up the frame with my graduation photo, looked at it, and placed it back just as carefully. It was at that moment he turned a little more, and a beam of light from the street lamp fell on his hand, the one resting on the back of the armchair, and I saw it. On the back of his right hand, just below the knuckles, was a scar, small but very distinct, in the shape of a jagged triangle. Everything inside me dropped. I had seen that scar before. Flashes of memory raced before my eyes. The man in the corner coffee shop who seemed too attentive when I was ordering a latte. His hand resting on the counter. That very scar. Then, in a crowded subway car a month ago, he was standing nearby, holding onto the handrail. And again, that scar, flashing before my eyes. He wasn't a stranger. He was a shadow that had been hovering on the periphery of my life for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to notice it. This realization sent a new wave of icy horror through my body. This wasn't a random intrusion. This was the culmination of something long and deliberate. Suddenly, as if sensing my tension, he turned sharply and looked directly at me. His face was in the shadow of the hood, but I felt his gaze. He knew I was awake. It all happened in seconds. He darted towards the exit. His foot hit the bedside table, and something small, dark, flew out of his jacket pocket and fell onto the carpet with a soft thud. He didn't pick it up. He rushed to the door, burst out onto the landing, and I heard his fast, receding footsteps on the stairs. I lay there, unable to move, for maybe a minute, maybe 10. Then, with a superhuman effort, I forced myself to get up. The apartment door was wide open. The hallway was empty. Shaking as if with a fever, I ran over and slammed it shut, turned the key, clicked the bolt. Only then did I allow myself to sink to the floor and burst into tears. And then my gaze fell on the doormat. Lying there was a small, dark leather notebook. My heart sank again. I crawled over, picked it up. It was cold to the touch. Slowly, with a sense of impending new shock, I opened it, and my world completely collapsed. It wasn't a diary. It was a dossier. On me. The pages were filled with neat, tiny handwriting. My daily routine with minute-by-minute precision. 7:15, wake up. 7:30, coffee by the window. 8:00, start work. 13:00, lunch, usually salad. 19:30, orders dinner via app. My routes. Tuesday and Thursday, gym, route through the park, takes 12 minutes. Saturday, store on Main Street, prefers to wear blue windbreaker. A list of my habits. Likes green tea with jasmine, afraid of dogs, listens to crime podcasts in headphones. Before bed, always checks the lock 3 times. There were other, more eerie notes. Bought a new plant, a ficus. Put it in the living room. Cried this evening. Reason unknown. Wore a red dress. Looked very nice on her. And on the very last page, under today's date, just one line, written with particular care. Door not locked. Finally. I've been sitting in the bathroom for an hour. The police should be here any minute. I'm holding this notebook in my hands. It's not just evidence. It's a chronicle of my enslavement. All these months, I wasn't paranoid. I was prey. And that click, that terrible, familiar click, it wasn't a question. It was the ritual of a hunter, checking the cage of his quarry every night. And tonight, the cage was open. Update: 3 months have passed. I'm writing this from a new apartment, in a different city. My fingers still tremble as they touch the keyboard. The police came quickly that night. 2 officers, initially skeptical, grew grim when I handed them the notebook. I immediately told them about the scar. I described the man from the coffee shop and the subway. But the cameras in my building weren't working. and footage from the nearby gas station only showed a blurry silhouette in a hood. The notebook became the main piece of evidence. Together with the detectives, we reread every line. Among the dry records of my life, we found a key, the name of the coffee shop, the Daily Grind, and a time. 1730 appeared several times, that very place where I first noticed him. The detectives set up an operation there, and a week later, they caught him. His name is Daniel Royce. He was a regular at that coffee shop. When he was arrested, on his right hand was that very same jagged, triangular scar. It turned out he wasn't a genius maniac. He was an accountant, lonely, unremarkable. During interrogations, he said he just liked me and wanted to be closer. He had been watching me since the day I accidentally spilled coffee on him at the Daily Grind. His lawyers are now filing motions, and psychiatrists are writing reports about his unstable condition. The trial is scheduled for next month. I have to testify, to look him in the eye. I should feel relieved, but I don't. I changed my name, moved, carry pepper spray. Knowing that he is a real captured person didn't bring peace. It brought a different truth. Monsters exist. They don't live under the bed. They drink coffee next door, keep ledgers, and carry leather notebooks to record someone else's life. He sits in a cell, but I still check the lock 3 times every night, and every time I fall asleep, I see his hand with that scar resting on the back of my armchair. And I understand that some doors once opened never truly close again. Story 2. We bought this cursed house 3 months ago. The deal seemed incredibly profitable. An old but sturdy mansion in a good neighborhood at a price that was a good 30% below market value. The agent, a nervous man in his 50s, mumbled something about difficult heirs and an urgent sale, but Lena and I were so happy to find our own home that we didn't pay it any mind. Now I understand. We were warned. They just didn't do it directly enough. The first 2 weeks we spent renovating the upper floors, re-wallpapering, replacing floors, fixing up the kitchen. The basement remained the last place I hadn't checked. That Saturday, Lena went to her parents, and I decided to finally deal with that space. The basement turned out to be larger than I had assumed, a spacious room with a low ceiling, divided into several sections by rough brick partitions. In the farthest wall, behind old furniture and boxes of junk, I found something strange, a section of fresh brickwork, about 1 meter by 1 meter. The bricks were laid unevenly, the mortar bulging out in places, as if someone had hastily sealed an opening, not caring about neatness. Curiosity got the better of me. I took a rotary hammer, a sledgehammer, and a chisel and got to work. The masonry was flimsy. Within 40 minutes, I had punched a hole big enough to look inside, and I was stunned. Behind the bricks was a massive wooden door, reinforced with steel bands and with 2 powerful bolts. The door looked old but well maintained. The metal was clean, without traces of rust, and the wood was treated with a protective compound. In the evening, I went back down with a powerful flashlight to get a better look at the find. I put my favorite brass lighter, a gift from my father, on a protruding brick right in front of the door, and carefully studied the keyhole. The door wasn't locked. I even opened it a couple of centimeters. A wave of damp cold and something else. A sweetish, unpleasant smell came from the crack. After closing the door, I went back upstairs. I took the lighter with me. I distinctly remember it clinking heavily against the keys in my pocket. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy head. Lena was already bustling about in the kitchen. "I heard you hammering in the basement yesterday?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Yeah, was checking some old masonry," I lied, for some reason not wanting to share the discovery. After breakfast, I went back down to the basement with the firm intention of sealing the hole and forgetting about everything. But approaching the door, I froze. An icy shiver ran down my spine. Right there on the very brick where I had left the lighter the previous evening, it lay. I stopped breathing. I was absolutely sure I had taken it with me. I remembered its weight in my pocket when I went up the stairs. I remembered putting it on the bedside table. Someone had been in our house. While we were sleeping, panic, sharp and reckless, rose in me. I didn't tell Lena. She was already nervous about the move. Instead, I took a crowbar, the most powerful flashlight I had, and with desperate resolve, went down to the basement. I had to find out what was behind that door. The door opened with a quiet creak. What I saw made my heart race wildly. It wasn't a storage room or a bomb shelter. Behind the door began a narrow, low corridor, made of the same rough brick as the basement. It stretched into impenetrable darkness, and my flashlight couldn't pierce it to the end. The air here was completely still, stale, and smelled of mold, damp earth, and that same sweetish rotten smell I had caught yesterday. I took the first step, then a second. The walls seemed alive, breathing. After 20 meters, the corridor ended at a fork. Two absolutely identical branches diverged at an angle. I chose the left one and walked on, marking arrows on the walls. The labyrinth turned out to be insanely complex. Dead ends gave way to new forks. Corridors spiraled, leading me back to already marked spots. I had been walking for about an hour and was starting to panic. And then I heard it. First a quiet rustle, then a muffled moan. A woman's. So full of hopelessness and despair that the blood froze in my veins. I ran towards the sound, turned another corner, and saw her. In a small niche chained to the wall sat a girl. She was emaciated to the state of a skeleton covered in gray, dirty skin. She was wearing rags that might once have been a dress. Her hair was matted and dull, but the most terrible thing was her eyes, huge, filled with bottomless animal fear. She looked at me not as a savior, but as another threat. "Go away," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Before he comes back, he always comes back." Suddenly, footsteps sounded very close by, heavy, measured, unhurried. I instinctively turned off the flashlight and pressed myself against the cold brick wall, holding my breath. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed it could be heard throughout the labyrinth. A man emerged from the darkness. In his 50s, short, stocky, he was dressed in clean but worn work clothes. His face was utterly ordinary. Nothing gave away the monster. He looked like a plumber or a handyman. "Emily, dear." His voice was calm, almost tender, and that made it even more terrifying. "I brought you dinner." He placed a metal bowl of some colorless gruel in front of her. At that moment, I snapped. Fear was replaced by rage. I stepped out of the shadows, gripping the crowbar so hard my knuckles turned white. "Who are you?" My voice was hoarse and loud, shattering the tomb-like silence of the underground. He turned to me slowly, without a trace of surprise on his face. His eyes, cold and assessing, slid over me. "Alex, the new owner," he said in an even, somewhat hollow voice. "I am Frank, the real owner of this house." Later, from the investigator's report, I learned the whole story. Frank was indeed the previous owner. He had inherited the house from his parents and lived there alone all his life. It turned out he had been building this system of tunnels for decades, initially as a bomb shelter, then the idea evolved into something more. When his relatives, concerned by his reclusiveness, obtained a court order to sell the house to pay for his care in a specialized institution, Frank simply didn't leave. He remained living in his labyrinth. "You entered my house," he said, slowly approaching. A blade suddenly glinted in his hand, a long hunting knife. "No one enters my house uninvited. No one leaves my house without permission." What happened next, I remember in fragments, like frames from a bad dream. I rushed at him with the crowbar. We grappled in the dark, our struggle accompanied by ragged breathing, curses, the clang of metal on brick. He was incredibly strong for his age. I felt his heavy, hot breath on my face, the smell of sweat and earth. I don't remember how I managed to knock the knife out of his hand. I only remember that I hit his armed hand with the crowbar with all my strength, heard a crunch and his stifled cry. The knife clattered away into the darkness. Frank retreated, clutching his injured hand, his face contorted with pain and rage. "Come back!" he roared. "Everyone come back! This is my house!" I didn't finish him off. Instead, I ran to Emily. The keys to the lock securing her chain were sticking out of the pocket on Frank's belt. I snatched them with trembling hands. The lock clicked. The heavy chain crashed to the floor. Emily was free, but she could barely stand. Years of captivity had taken their toll. "Hold on to me," I whispered, supporting her. "We're getting out of here." We stumbled back. I dragged her along, navigating by my marks on the walls. Behind us, we could hear Frank's insane screams. He was following our trail, his voice echoing through the stone corridors. "You won't leave. You're mine. All of you are mine." We tumbled out into the basement. I slammed the heavy door shut and shoved both massive bolts home with a crash. My heart was trying to escape my chest. Emily collapsed onto the concrete floor, sobbing. Lena, hearing the crash and the screams, had run downstairs. Seeing us, me, bloodied, with wild eyes, and the emaciated, dirty woman in rags, she screamed in horror. "Call the police," I yelled at her, "and an ambulance, quick." The police and ambulance arrived 10 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. I sat on the steps, holding a trembling Lena, and couldn't take my eyes off the locked door, expecting it to start giving way under the blows from inside at any moment. When the officers arrived, I briefly explained the situation. They entered the labyrinth with weapons drawn. They found Frank in one of the dead ends. He was sitting, leaning against the wall, muttering something to himself. He didn't resist. Emily was taken to the hospital. It turned out she had gone missing 2 years ago. She was the previous prospective buyer who had come to view the house with the real estate agent. The agent was later found dead in the woods, officially an accident. Now it's clear that was Frank's work. My lighter? Yes, he took it that night while we slept. He came through a secret passage that led right into our bedroom, just to show that he could, to let me know we weren't alone in this house. We moved out the very next day. We packed our things haphazardly, left everything associated with that house. Now we're renting a small apartment on the other side of the city, but I still wake up at night from every little noise. Every creak of the floorboards makes me jump out of bed in a cold sweat. And every time I see old houses, especially those sold at a bargain price, I think, what might be hiding behind their walls, in the silence, in the dark, behind fresh masonry, no mysticism, just human madness, taken to the absolute, brick, darkness, and a silent horror waiting for its time. Be careful when you buy old houses. Sometimes they have an unwelcome owner, and he doesn't plan on going anywhere. Story 3. Hello, everyone. I'm writing this statement not just for you, but for myself, to record every horrifying moment before my memory begins to blur the sharpest edges, replacing them with rational but false explanations. My name is Christopher Wright. I'm 42 years old, and I'm an architect from Boston. This post isn't just a confession, it's a warning. My escape was a carefully planned act of self-soothing. After 15 years of marriage, which ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, slow decay, like the rotting of a log, I was emotionally drained. My job at a prestigious firm, once my purpose, had become a simulacrum of activity. I sold everything that reminded me of my past life and found refuge in the wooded hills of West Virginia, an old but sturdy cedar log house standing on the outskirts of a former coal mining town. The nearest neighbor, 3 miles away. No internet, except for a capricious satellite connection. No stable cell service. Perfect seclusion. I thought that among the tall pines and birdsong, I could hide from myself. The first few days were a deceptive idyll. The silence was so loud it made my ears ring. I drank coffee on the porch, worked on my drafts, and went to sleep under the deafening chorus of crickets. I began to believe I had found a panacea for my former life. Everything changed on the 12th day. It was a deep, pitch-black night. I was awakened not by a sound, but by a sensation, that primal animal feeling of your space being violated, the feeling of being stared at from the darkness. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart hammering wildly, and then I saw it, a shadow outside the window, a blurry but unmistakably human silhouette, frozen and staring directly at my bed. It didn't move. It just absorbed me with its faceless presence. I didn't breathe, paralyzed by fear. A minute passed, then another. Then, without a single sound, the shadow drifted away and dissolved into the night. I convinced myself it was sleep paralysis, a hallucination from fatigue, a trick of the moonlight and branches. But it happened again. The next night, and the night after. Always, after midnight. It always followed the same route with the methodical precision of clockwork, from the forest to the living room window, a long, agonizing pause at my bedroom, then the kitchen window. It was a ritual. I tried shouting, banging on the glass, turning on the lights. In response, complete, mocking silence. The shadow would simply retreat, unhurriedly, as if it knew it had all the time in the world. Fear turned into soul-freezing paranoia. I drove into town and bought everything I could. Night vision cameras with motion sensors, powerful tactical flashlights on solar power, new steel locks for all the doors and windows. I set up the cameras, but due to the weak satellite signal, they could only record to a memory card with no live feed. I placed the flashlights around the perimeter, aiming them at the darkest areas. The first night after installation, I stayed awake, with my grandfather's shotgun on my lap, staring at the flickering monitor from the cameras. He came, as expected. Exactly at 2:17 a.m., the flashlight by the living room suddenly flared up, flooding the yard with an unnatural, almost surgical white light, and in that light, I saw him truly for the first time. It wasn't a ghost, it was a man. Tall, stooped, with a gray matted beard that seemed to have twigs and last year's leaves stuck in it. He was wearing dirty work pants, soaked with sweat and dirt, and a dark, faded jacket. But the most terrifying thing, his face. It was gaunt, his skin like parchment, weathered and cracked, but his eyes burned with a quiet, insane resolve, like embers in an ashtray. He wasn't frightened by the light. He didn't even flinch. He just slowly, very slowly, turned his head and stared directly at the window behind which I was sitting. His gaze was empty, devoid of all humanity, and yet full of such primal hatred that it sent shivers down my spine. He stood like that, unblinking, for half a minute, then, without changing his expression, spat on the ground, right in the center of the circle of light, and vanished into the forest shadows like a ghost. In that moment, I understood the depth of the danger. I wasn't dealing with a curious drifter, but with someone who considered this place his sacred territory. I called the sheriff's office. The deputy on duty listened to me with a tone of bored condescension. "Sounds like old Archie," he said. "Archibald Grayson. He lives out there in the woods, in a run-down place on an abandoned farm, a cranky old man obsessed with his land, but he usually doesn't bother anyone. We'll talk to him when we get a chance." That chance didn't come for another 10 days, and the visits didn't just continue, they escalated. He became demonstratively bolder. One morning, I found that someone hadn't just rummaged through the trash can, but had neatly arranged its contents on the porch cans, wrappers, like some kind of sacrifice. Another night, in pitch darkness, there were 3 slow metallic knocks on the bedroom window. He wasn't knocking with his knuckles, but with some kind of tool. I couldn't sleep anymore. I couldn't eat. I sat in the living room, in complete darkness, and listened. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me flinch and grip the shotgun. I had become a trapped, trembling animal in the cage of my own home. The smell of my fear seemed to hang in the air, attracting him. The climax came on a Friday. I had run out of groceries and needed to go to town. Understanding the risk, I checked all the locks twice, set the cameras to continuous recording, and left, feeling an icy worm of anxiety gnawing at my gut. I returned at dusk, around 8 in the evening. As I approached the house, I immediately felt that something was wrong. The air was still and heavy. The porch light was shattered, glass littering the ground. I parked the car, turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, making it hard to breathe. The door to the house was ajar. I was 100% sure I had locked all 3 deadbolts. I grabbed a heavy tire iron from the trunk and, holding my breath, stepped inside. The house smelled. It smelled of someone else's sweat, dirt, rotten leaves, and something sour, animalistic. The air was stale and heavy. From the living room came the muffled sound of my TV, some old western. I crept to the doorway and peered in. He was sitting in my armchair, his back to me. His gray, dirty head was tilted back against the headrest. On the table next to him stood a half-empty bottle of my whiskey, from which he was drinking straight from the neck. He was watching TV as if it were the most ordinary evening of his life. "Hey!" burst out of me, my voice cracking into a shrill falsetto. He turned slowly with theatrical slowness. His insane, sunken eyes met mine. His face showed neither surprise nor fear, only a calm, almost paternal irritation, as if I were a bothersome servant disturbing his peace. "What are you doing here? This is my house." His voice was hoarse, raspy, like dry rot. "No, Archie, this is my house. I bought it. Get the fuck out of here." I tried to sound commanding, but it came out as a plea. The tire iron was shaking in my hands. He shook his head, as if pitying my ignorance. "My house. My father built it. These walls remember my breath. You're a thief. You stole it. You get out." He rose heavily from the chair, like a bear, and then I saw it. In his right hand, hanging by his side, he was holding my wood-splitting axe. The wooden handle was dark with age and sweat, the blade gleaming dully in the TV light. "I said, get out!" he hissed, and the embers of madness flared in his eyes. He didn't lunge. He walked towards me. Slowly, stepping heavily, raising the axe. It was more terrifying than any fury. It was inevitability. I jumped back, the tire iron clattering to the floor. The axe sank into the door jamb inches from my temple with a short, wet thwack, splintering the wood. Adrenaline shot through my head. I rushed forward, tackling him to the floor. He was old and frail, but his body held a wild, insane strength, born of obsession. He growled, scratched my face, tried to sink his teeth into my arm. His breath was foul. We wrestled on the floor, overturning furniture. He tried to reach for the axe. I hit him with my fists in the face, the body, choked him, did everything to survive. Finally, I managed to pin him on his back, grab his hands, and wrench the axe away. I flung it across the room. He lay beneath me, wheezing and muttering something incoherent about his house. Gasping for air, holding him down with one hand, I dialed the sheriff with the other. They arrived quickly. 2 deputies. They knew Archie. It turned out the Grayson farm had indeed once extended to this land. The house I had moved into was built by his father. Archie himself had lost his wife and son in a car accident about 30 years ago, after which his mind had snapped. He continued to live in a half-ruined house on the edge of his property, gradually going insane, and over the years, in his head, this, my house, had become a symbol of a lost paradise, his lawful property, the only bright memory he was prepared to defend at any cost. My appearance was the final straw. He had decided to reclaim what was his by eliminating the unwelcome guest. They took him away, first to a drunk tank, and then, I was told, to a state psychiatric facility for evaluation. I didn't press charges. What was the point? He was a ghost of his own past, a product of a quiet, forgotten tragedy that the whole world had forgotten except for him, and I had just happened to be in his way. I finished packing my things. The house is up for sale. The realtor, a young guy from the city, cheerfully says there are lovers of authentic rural life. He doesn't understand, but I learned one simple thing. The most dangerous ghosts aren't from the other side. They are made of flesh and blood, and the most terrifying shadows are cast not by the souls of the dead, but by living people whose past and mind have become stronger than their present. I was running from the ghosts of my own past, and almost came face to face with the ghost of someone else's. And that's enough for me for the rest of my life. Silence no longer seems peaceful to me. It seems ominous, and I can hear it again, that same slow crunch of footsteps on the gravel.